Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Simon Timperley from the International Food Safety and Quality Network. Welcome to today's webinar, which is it's about pest control, and it's preventing a food safety crisis with pest management. It's nothing to do with cybersecurity, so apologies for that faux pas. It's definitely preventing a food safety crisis with pest management, and the speaker today is Chelle Hartzer from Orkin, and we'll be introducing you to Chelle shortly. Just a couple of things. Today's webinar is being recorded as always, so if you get called away or have any outages or anything unexpected, don't worry. It's being recorded, and we'll follow up with all registrants via email with the video and also the slide deck and some other goodies, resources and links to further information. So it's great to have you with us today. I know some of you obviously know already. You're typing in the chat bar. Just type in, tell us who you are, where you're from. Yeah, Dawn, it's very hot in Northamptonshire. It's very hot all over the world. So yeah, type your comments in there, get to know each other. Ideally, save your questions till the end, because there's a huge comment stream, and we'll have difficulty finding it. So try and keep your questions till the end. Right, at this point, I'd like to introduce you to Chelle Hartzer. Hello, Chelle, are you there?
I am. Hello, everybody.
Nice to see you. Now, can you tell the audience where you're calling in from, Chelle?
So right now we are in Atlanta, Georgia. And
the weather is?
Hot.
Hot. It's hot all over the world. It's summer, and also it's very, very hot. So we're really looking forward to the presentation today. We've got, as I told you before, about 1,369 registered, so should have some good input today. Okay, Chelle, so I'll load the presentation. We'll switch our webcams off, and I'll be back later, but for now, I'll hand you over to Chelle.
All right, great to see all the places you folks are from. We've got people from all over the world. This is awesome. So thank you so much for being here. We are going to, of course, talk a number of things, but all really as it relates to pest management. You folks know that in a food facility, in a storage facility, anything dealing with food, there are a huge number of things going on, a lot of different factors, a lot of things you have to worry about. And pest management is one of those things. As we get started here, certainly kind of want to see what you do. How are you currently managing your pest control? Are you doing it in-house? Are you hiring another company to do it? Do you have any role to play in it? What do some of your employees do? So if you could, in that chat bar, kind of think about that. How are you currently managing your pest control in your facility? Think broad. Think just not, we have Joe doing it, but specifics on maybe some of the things that you're doing. From all of you folks all across the world, I'm sure everybody has a little bit different take on this, a little bit different opinion, a little bit different way that they're doing this. So if you get a chance, it looks like we may be having a few video issues, so hopefully we can get those resolved for you folks. But we've got a bunch of other of you folks. So Kathy, thank you. We've been using Orkin. Love it. Definitely love that. So some of you folks, looks like you're doing it in-house. Great. That presents some benefits and some drawbacks, just like doing it third party. So definitely some things to think about as we go through here. A couple more third party, thank you, Heather, for using Orkin. Love to hear that. Sandra doing it in-house. Perfect. So yeah, as we go through this, Ecolab, hiring third parties, all of that, as we go through this, think about how this relates to the methods that you are specifically using. And kind of a little bit of background here. Of course, most of you folks know about FSMA, the Food Safety Modernization Act in the United States. For those of you overseas, this was a major overhaul to our food safety system that really looked at really looked at how things are done, and HARPC was part of that. And HARPC is the Hazard Analysis and Risk-Based Preventative Controls. FSMA was enacted about 7 years ago, and there was lots of, let's say, angst, not necessarily panic, but some angst when that came out, about what that was going to mean and what that was going to entail for the food industry and how we were going to react to this in a pest management standpoint. And in all honesty, there didn't need to be too much that changed. When we went from HACCP, which is Hazard Analysis and Critical Control Points, to HARPC, that, was a little bit different. One of the greatest comments I heard when this came out, one of my colleagues who knew a lot about this said that HARPC is just HACCP on steroids. It's HACCP kicked up a few notches. And one of the big parts of this was the reasonably foreseeable food safety hazards. And this was a little tough. And a great example of this is there was a frozen food manufacturer here in the United States, and they knew that their product could contain salmonella, but they didn't see that as a hazard because once you cooked it, it killed the salmonella. But what they didn't foreseeably notice is that many people were undercooking their frozen meals, in which case they were getting the salmonella, they were getting ill. And so this now becomes a foreseeable food safety hazard because they know about it. So some things to think about when it comes to that. And again, with HARPC, what we are looking at here, again, hazard analysis and risk-based preventative controls. We are looking at the risk on this. Instead of just identifying that one or two critical control points, we're looking at all the hazards now. We're looking at naturally occurring hazards and unintentional hazards. So thinking about all of this for those risk-based preventative controls, HACCP, the old program, you might have had a single step, maybe 2 steps that would control at that critical point that would control something. It was very reactionary. Now we're looking at those preventative controls. We're looking for multiple aspects to prevent these issues from happening. And again, as this relates to pest management, we want to prevent some of these insect issues, some of these rodent issues, some of the other pests. Interesting little tidbit. Again, I know we have a number of folks from outside of the United States, but HACCP, when it came out, the only people who were required to have a HACCP plan were those in the meat, including poultry, juice, and seafood industries. Many other industries adopted some type of HACCP program, but now with HARPC, Hazard Analysis, Risk-Based Preventative Controls, now with this, all food facilities in the United States are required to follow this. And again, we switch from that reactionary method to a much more preventative method on this. And again, looking at these hazards, looking at all of these reasonably foreseeable hazards. Many of these have been around for a while. What changed with FSMA was adding in those radiological hazards. This is a tricky one. I'm pretty sure for most of the food industry, there's not a lot of radiological hazards that you can foreseeably tell in your business, but it's in there now. And one of the other big ones is that intentionally introduced hazards. Think back a number of years in the United States, we had a big issue with pet food, and pet food was being recalled because it was contaminated with melamine. Chinese company had introduced melamine for economic gain to adulterate the product, get more money with cheaper ingredients. And it caused a number of deaths. And of course, our pets are part of the family for a lot of us. So that was a very big deal. So we're not just thinking of those hazards that are going to be natural, but those that could be introduced as well. And again, how this all relates back is preventing these issues. And of course, your pest management program is part of this. And we obviously want to prevent some of these issues. And so again, another quick chat in question, since you guys are so active. This is great seeing all you folks active on the chat box. Think of your facility and what pests do you most commonly see in your facility? And this should be interesting because again, we have you folks from all over the world, and we're going to see different pests in different facilities in different areas of the world. Whether that's Helene there, you're an apple grower, I bet you have some agricultural pests that you deal with. Some of you folks from the United States, whether we've got flies, rodents, mice, all of those things. We do tend to see a little bit of a consistency across the world, but there's also some fun ones. What did I just, frogs up there. That's a great one. So yeah, wherever you are, you're going to see some of these different pests. And as you folks continue to text that in, if you guys keep an eye on that, you'll see some of these interesting ones from across the world even that people are dealing with. And I think that's so interesting. Now to get to the good stuff, of course, in my opinion, love the pest aspect of this, of course. So when we look at integrated pest management, this fits perfectly within that risk-based preventative controls. Again, we are trying to prevent a lot of these issues instead of just reacting to them. And not just preventing the issues, but also preventing them from getting bigger, from getting worse. You folks know that, to keep flies and spiders out of your facility is impossible. But what if we can keep 99% of them out of there? What if we can keep those populations really, really small and prevent them from getting bigger so we don't get to those levels that you consider an infestation, that they're all over? So when we think of this preventative system, it's preventative from a standpoint of having the issue happen in the first place, but also with these issues, keeping them small, keeping them manageable. We want to use multiple tools to provide these solutions. It's not just that one critical control point. It's using every tool that we have in our toolbox to try and solve some of these problems, not just cover them up, but really solve the problems so we can prevent them. We want to really target these things while they're small. And this includes not just one person doing it. Again, even if you have a third party that's out there doing your pest control, but really this involves everybody at your facility, every set of eyes that's out there, reporting those issues, keeping an eye on things, communicating when they start to see things. So as we go through and talk about this, think of this as a plan, it's a toolbox, and it's using everything. Because there are a number of issues that come up when we talk about pest management. And of course, your facility is going to depend on what's going on around you, what your facility is, even to the point of how old your building is. Now, this can go both ways. I've seen some facilities that are old, but they are well kept up. The sanitation is really good. They're sealed up well. And I've seen almost brand new buildings that have tons of holes in them. A great example of this is I used to work at a facility in the United States that was both an animal feed production that literally was right up next to a flour mill. And they shared a wall, but that animal feed building had more holes than Swiss cheese. I think it had more holes than it did actually walls. But the flour mill that quite literally shared a central wall with it was sealed up nice and tight, and they were about the same age, but one of them had been kept up very well, the other one hadn't. And you can imagine with that which one is going to have more problems. So even if you have an older facility, that's okay. If it's kept up well, if you know where your hot spots are, you can address that in a lot of cases. If you have a new building, don't think that that's going to save you from everything. You've got to keep up on a lot of these things to continue to make it the best facility that you can. So with that as well, what's going on around your building? It's not just your building itself. What are your neighbors like? There was a facility in the downtown California area that had lots of residential neighbors, actually. So most of our pest issues at this particular facility were a little bit more urban pests. They were the rats, they were the mice, they were the cockroaches. But even if you're out in the middle of a field your problems are still there. They're just different problems. If you're out in the middle of a field in Kansas, you don't have many neighbors like other food processing or big residential areas, but you have all the agricultural pests that may just decide to come in your door. A lot of mice issues, since the mice are more prevalent in some of those areas. So look at your surroundings of your facility. Look at your neighbors, look at what's going on. We obviously can't control what your neighbors are doing, but if you know what they are, if you know some of the issues that might come from those areas, again, you can protect yourself, you can prevent some of those issues from getting inside your facility. And of course, as many of you mentioned, it's kind of warm in the northern hemisphere, at least. You folks down in the southern hemisphere are going through winter right now, but whatever season that you are in is going to have an impact. Extreme weather, anything that's different than normal, can create pest issues. When we have extreme heat, I've noticed, especially in the United States, when things get very, very hot, we seem to have more fly problems. When things get very, very cold, again, in the United States, I tend to notice a lot more mice issues. When things get very dry, when we start to go through droughts, especially I was out in California a couple years ago and they were going through a drought, we saw a lot more of those agricultural pests that were coming in from the fields looking for some moisture, some shade, something to get them out of those dry conditions. When we see very, very wet conditions, when we see floods and things like that, I tend to see more wildlife issues. When we had the floods a couple years ago in Texas, snakes were the biggest issue. Snakes were coming out and they were flooded out of their homes and coming into structures which were a little bit drier, a little bit more protected for them. So think about this every time that you are going to have some abnormal weather and what pests could potentially impact you for that. Your normal seasonality is also going to have an impact. In the fall, we tend to see a little bit more mice, we see more wasps, some of those fall pests that are going to get in and invade, even though they're not going to infest. In the spring, I tend to see a lot more spiders, roly-polies, little pill bugs, millipedes with the spring conditions. So remember that wherever you are and what some of those pests you start to see on a yearly basis at certain times of the year, because again, you can think about your preventative methods at certain times of the year. If you know you're in for very heavy rainfall and you might see some floods, you can respond to that early on and prevent some of these pest entries. Of course, your facility, we talked about older buildings versus newer buildings. Sometimes let's be honest, there's not much you can do about it. It's your building. For some of those older ones or, places like this juice facility, you can't move stuff around too easily. You can't just pick up a piece of equipment and shift it over a couple feet, but you know what's there. And in some cases, you can think about how you can sort of segregate your facility. There was one facility that I had that it was an older facility, and you could see from this one, you see some of that moisture on the ground, some of that water buildup. The floor is not draining correctly. And I had a facility similar to this was happening in a particular area, and they were having a huge issue with small flies, fruit flies and forage flies. And what happened was they actually put up kind of a temporary wall. They put up heavy hanging plastic and a little bit of wood support to keep it up, which segregated that area from most of their other production. So the flies were still there, but now they were captured in this one area that they knew was going to be wet, that they knew had drainage problems, but now they're isolating that and preventing that from getting into other areas of the facility. So when you think of your facility design, when you think about how things are set up, where some of your problems are, also think about, maybe some temporary solutions of what you can do to isolate some of these problems if you can't actually fix them. And then we get to some of these preventative controls. Everything we've talked about here, you can start to do, start to think about to prevent some of these pest issues. Inspection, of course, is incredibly important. And I like to joke that inspection is easy. All you have to do is look at everything all the time. which is incredibly difficult because most of you have jobs to do. So how do you look at everything all the time? But again, think about your multiple tools that you're using here. Think about overlaps. If you know your facility, if you know how it's constructed, if you know your facility design, you should be able to see some of those hot spots, and you can inspect some of those hot spots a little more heavily than maybe some of those areas that you know have not had problems in the past. Keep in mind that seasonality, what's going on this season, and where might you see some of those pests around your facility. Keep in mind the weather, your facility weaknesses. Think of some of those points that, hey, we know that pests could get in here. We can't do anything about it right now, but we can keep an eye on it so we can prevent those pests from getting deeper into the facility or those pests from building up in higher numbers. And also with your inspection, don't forget about your neighbors on the outside. What's going on with them? Are things changing on the outside as well as the inside? And of course, along with inspection, it's not just your building, not just inside the box, not just looking at sanitation and exclusion, but think about what's coming in and going out of your facility. Think about all those deliveries. Think about all those vehicles. Some of you may have rail cars. Some of you may have trucks. Some of you may have other means of delivering goods in and taking them out. A great example I have of inspecting not just the inside, but looking at what's coming in and going out. I had a facility with cockroach problems, and these were the outside type of cockroaches. They really don't get into structures and infest like a German or an American cockroach will, but these were woods roaches. And we couldn't figure out why we kept finding them inside the facility because, again, we knew they should be outside and we were preventing, we were looking at our door seals. How are they getting in? Finally found out it was how they were storing their empty pallets on the outside. They were storing them on the grassy area, and those cockroaches were getting into the pallets, and then they were pulling the pallets inside the facility to be loaded with their product. In doing so, they pulled the cockroaches inside. So think about the outside as much as you think about the inside, and even some of those outside, we'll say pests, but are pests on the outside, but shouldn't be a pest on the inside, how that may affect where you store things on the outside, what's going on the outside, even to the point of lighting. So inspection is tough because it's hard to look at everything all the time, but kind of think about that and remember your hot spots again. Sanitation is again very easy. All you have to do is clean up everything. But for those of you folks who work with food, how do you clean up everything? You're working with food. You're trying to produce a product that people want to eat, but also our pests do too. So what your goal is here is not necessarily to clean up every little last crumb of food, but it's to minimize the amount and the access to this food that pests have. So the example that I always like to use is I'm sitting in a room with about 6 people right now, and it's lunchtime for us here in the United States on the East Coast. And so somebody just brought in 8 big, huge pizzas, and they definitely brought in my favorite of the anchovies and olives and onions and extra garlic. So I'm happy, and everybody's kind of got their own pizza, and we're going to eat tons of pizza and go into a food coma in about an hour. But what happens now if all 6 of us, somebody only brings in 1 piece of pizza and they put it 3 doors over behind 1 locked door? Now it's a lot harder to get to that food. We have to work so much harder. And even when we get to it, not all of us are going to get to it because I'm going to trample somebody on the way over and they're not going to make it. But those of us who do now have so much less food to eat. So we're very stressed out. And if we're stressed out and our concern is finding food, we're not reproducing very quickly. We're not interested in going out to find a friend and mate and lay eggs. So think about this when it comes to what's going on at your facility. What type of food are you producing? What are the attractants? And how much of that can you clean up and contain? Again, go back to my example of those flies that we built that temporary wall to kind of hold them in. We isolated them. We made it a lot harder for them to get out and get some of those other food sources that were outside of that. So think of your pests. Think of what they're after and try and minimize the amount that they have access to. Make it tough for them, make them work for it. And we can also look at the facility. Again, we can look at this from an outside standpoint. We mentioned bringing those cockroaches in. Remember that a full-grown rat needs something about the size of a quarter to get into a facility. A full-grown mouse just needs the size of a dime. Any insects, any little crack. If you stand on the inside of your facility and look at like your door or your dock door, and you can see daylight around that area, you have an area that insects can enter. So think of all those areas, look at them, seal up as many of those as you can. And don't forget to look up. I had a situation not too long ago that we were finding cigarette beetles in a facility, and it was very strange because they were kind of in the middle of this facility. They weren't near doors, they weren't near windows. We looked all around, couldn't find many entry points. Finally, we went up on the roof, and there was an air handling unit that somebody had replaced the filters on, and they had replaced the filters incorrectly. So there was a gap. And so the cigarette beetles were literally being sucked in from the outside through the air handling unit into the facility. So don't just look low, don't just look at the doors and openings, but also look up. Look at what's on your roof. Look at all those openings that may connect the inside to the outside of your facility. When we talk about facility maintenance, of course, it's not just the box itself, it's not just the building, but again, look on the outside, look at those trees, those bushes, look at your parking lots. Do you have a lot of trash around your parking lots? Are there outside areas that your employees may use that have overfilling trash bins? Look for all of those things and ensure that the outside of your facility looks as good as the inside of your facility. Because that way, a lot of our pest issues that may start on the outside and work their way in, again, will be a lot lower. We can prevent those populations from building up, and that way we can prevent more of them from getting inside. We've talked a lot about exclusion, and the basic idea here is, can we keep them out? Again, stand on the inside of your facility if you can. It's great if you can turn some of the lights off so you can see that daylight, see that around the doors. Don't forget those dock doors. We look at personnel doors quite a bit. You may have windows in your facility. Make sure those are screened. And again, remember back to that fly example that I gave you of building that temporary wall. You can actually think about exclusion from the inside, excluding certain parts of your facility, of your structure from other ones. If you remember back to my example, back to that animal feed that was sharing a wall with the flour mill, obviously the flour mill had a lot lower tolerance for pests. And so those doors that connected the flour mill to the feed mill were very well sealed. They were better sealed than the doors that led to the outside of the facility because that was their main entry point. So think about the outside, think about the inside, think about the whole picture as you go through this. And monitoring is really important. This is a key part of your program. It's one of the great tools that you can use. You may have insect light traps to monitor flies or occasional invaders. You might have pheromone traps to monitor your stored product pests, glue boards for cockroaches and other crawling insects. These devices are your early warning system. These are an extra set of eyes. They're always working 24/7, letting you know where these issues are popping up. Again, this is a preventative control because you can use these to prevent issues from getting worse. Since you know about it early, you can do something earlier. So, maybe this will point out a sanitation issue that you didn't know you had, or somebody propping open a door, or infested product. And the key takeaway for most of you, especially if you have a third party doing your pest control, is respect these devices. These devices are really important. Let all of the employees know in your facility what they are there for, what they are doing. Don't use that metal mouse trap to prop open the door. Don't unplug that insect light trap so you can charge your cell phone. Don't use that sticky trap as your gum wrapper disposal. Let people know what they're there for, so that they respect those devices and those devices can do their job. We get great data out of those that, again, helps us with these preventative programs, preventing issues and preventing them from getting worse. And then, of course, we get to the last step when we look at treating. And this really is the last thing you should do. When we talk about sanitation and exclusion and monitoring, all of those things overlap, and all of those things should be done in conjunction with each other, all at the same time. But when it comes to treating for a pest problem, this should be the last step, because you want to look at everything else first and how you can solve some of those problems before you get to the treatment. Because I said that everything overlaps, right? So if your building has more holes and more openings than walls that are holding it up, it doesn't matter how much you spray. It doesn't matter if you fumigate that building. It doesn't matter how many treatments you put down. You've left all of these openings for the pest to come right back in. So your treatment is not going to be very effective until you can get some of that exclusion work done. Same thing with sanitation. If you have lots and lots of food laying around for these pests to eat, and you put down a bait, what's to say that that pest is going to go for the bait over the easy food source that it's got sitting around on your floor in your overflowing trash bin? And again, your monitors are going to help with your treatment as well. Your monitors are going to tell you where your hot spots are, where your big population is, so you can narrow in on that. You can determine where. And the other nice thing about your monitors, and as it relates to treatment, is, did it work? If you do a treatment, hopefully you should see your numbers in your monitors going down, right? You do a treatment, you treat an area, you should start to see those stored product pests reduce. You put out more bait for rodents, you should see your rodent population reduce. So we can use those monitors as well to evaluate, to verify what our treatments are doing and the fact that they're working. Maybe we need to switch something up. So again, our treatment step is the last step once we've looked at everything else, so that we can make sure that that treatment is as effective as possible and target the pests that we want to, target the areas that we want to. So again, we prevent those pests from spreading, we prevent those pests from getting bigger if we can treat them in small areas early on. Because if you remember back to HARPC, one of those first slides, number 4 was corrective action. So we have a pest problem. What do we do about it? Well, maybe we've addressed the sanitation issue. Maybe we've sealed the door that they're coming through. Maybe we've put down a little bit of bait to get those cockroaches. But number 5 on that list was verification. And verifying that your program is working is extremely important, because if you don't know whether your program is working or not, what good is it doing? And while I know a lot of you have a third party, but you and everyone at your site still have a responsibility for this. Your pest management professional, your technician, may point out those sanitation and exclusion issues, but you're the one who has to pick up a broom and sweep the floor. You're the one who has to call maintenance and get them to fix that broken door seal. So those are the corrective actions. You know, we've looked at the problem, we've determined the corrective action, and then again, your verification to that is, do you see those pest problems reducing? And I would really encourage you, if you don't, make sure that you have a pest sighting log in your facility. A pest sighting log is a very important piece of documentation that allows you and hopefully all of the people in your facility to point out problems when they see pests. So if somebody who is, you know, maybe your sanitation person notices a cockroach, they can write that down in the pest sighting log. So the next time your technician is here, they can go right to that spot. They know that they might have a cockroach issue. They can be prepared for that. A great example of this is I was at a facility, a chocolate manufacturing facility, and they were having a huge problem with Indian meal moth. And it turns out that that problem had been going on for months. It was all over the facility by the time I got there. And talking to many of the employees, they knew about it. They had been seeing it for months. I asked some of the employees how long this had been going on, and they said, oh, for quite some time, 3, maybe 4 months since we started seeing them. And I asked them, I said, who did you tell? And they looked at me like I was crazy, and they said, well, who would we tell? They didn't even know that they had a pest sighting log. Nobody had ever told them what it was, where it was, or how to use it. So we had done a training the next day with all of the employees at this plant. And I said, who can tell me where their pest sighting log was? And there was absolute silence. So we took that as an opportunity to teach them where it was and what to do with it. Because that way, the next time those Indian meal moth pop up, we can get an early response to it. We don't have to wait 4 months, 5 months, where that population just explodes and is all over the facility. Now we've got it when it's small, when it's manageable, and we can take advantage of those tools that we might have. So definitely have that pest sighting log. And that's your partnership with your third party. Even if you are doing your pest management in-house, you have somebody at your facility that does it, again, create that partnership with them. They are not the only one who's responsible for dealing with the pest. It is every single person in that facility. Use their eyes. They are a great opportunity. They know what's going on out there. So use them. Use that information. Give them an opportunity to record that, to write it down, and pass that information along, and foster that partnership between all of the employees out there and whoever is doing your pest management. Now, looking at the assessment, again, we've kind of mentioned this a little bit back and forth, talked about the verification aspect of this. Again, your monitors and even your pest sighting log all help to identify issues, but they also verify if these issues are if your corrective actions have worked and the issues have reduced. So think about this. If your insect light traps suddenly see an increase and you notice that a door is propped open, your corrective action is to close that door, make sure it's sealed. But now your verification is, do we see less insects in that insect light trap? Hopefully you should, and you know that that's your verification. Even from a pest sighting log standpoint, if you have employees that are reporting again and again and again that there's fly issues, once you do a treatment, once you perform your corrective actions, you should hopefully see less reports of flies in your pest sighting log. So you can think about all of these things that are going to help you verify and use that data. Again, use those monitors, use the pest sighting log to help you do this. And of course, at least an annual assessment. Look at what's happened over the last year, what can be changed or adjusted so that you can do better in the coming year. And of course, it is a bit of a pain, let's be honest. Nobody likes doing paperwork, but it's totally necessary. This shows the steps that you've taken, it shows the corrective actions, and it shows the improvement through that verification. Now, again, if you have a third party who's doing your pest management program, your PMP should be doing a lot of this paperwork, but that doesn't exclude anyone else from looking at that paperwork, ensuring it's current, ensuring that you don't have any questions about it. And again, paperwork includes that pest sighting log. So don't forget about that. Don't forget about looking at it. And again, including that information in the annual assessment. For those of you folks in the United States, and I know many other parts of the world, if you go through audits, if you go through a third-party audit or even maybe a government audit, if the government is auditing your food facility, all of these things are totally necessary because the auditors are going to be looking for it. So have that paperwork in place, have it correctly documented, and again, if it's a third party, talk to your third party technician, talk to that company about ensuring that it's up to date and everything that you want to be there. Because again, oops, sorry, too many slides. Again, auditors are going to be looking for this. And again, if you can be fully prepared for your audit, things will go a lot smoother. They won't be looking too deeply at some parts of your program, especially the pest management part. If all of your records are there, they're up to date, you can explain it, you can see those corrective actions when issues pop up, you can see the verification once they're done. So your auditor is looking for this information. And maybe it's an internal audit, maybe it's your parent company, or maybe it's a supplier. Maybe it's somebody that you are supplying too that wants to audit your facility. So the better your documentation and the better that your paperwork is, the smoother these things will go in the long run. And of course, for more IPM tips, we definitely have some great resources out there. There's some great resources on the internet. Orkin has some nice resources for you to use if you want. But I really encourage most of you that if you do have a third party, talk to your person, talk to your technician who's there on a regular basis. Ask them what's going on, have them tell you, have them explain to you, have them, point out things. Walk around with them one time and ask them what they're looking at and what they're looking for. I bet they'd really appreciate that you're taking interest in that. And it gives you a better understanding of what your portion of that is. And I think too, we have a great. So most of you are probably seeing a download now on your chat, working the bugs out. Again, great informative document for you that you can take a look at. If you have any questions whatsoever, I love getting questions from the field. Love problem solving. So my email is up here, mhartzer@rollins.com. I welcome any questions. If I can't answer them, I will find somebody who can for you.
Okay, Chelle, that was absolutely fabulous, fantastic. Let me stop sharing the slides and then. Yeah, that was super, that. Excellent. Loads of great tips and loads of great comments in the sidebar, as you could see. I hope it wasn't putting you off too much. Yeah, we loaded in the sidebar, as Chelle said, that guide, working the bugs out. You can click the download now button. It'll open a new window. You won't disappear from the webinar. And go and download that, or you can do it later, and we'll also put that in the follow-up email as well, a link to that. So right, we have got around about 20 minutes to take some questions. So here we go, let's just get straight stuck into them. Bill Hansen, we have groundhogs outside our facility. Are they a concern, and how would we eliminate them?
Great question. So groundhogs can be a concern, especially if you get too many of them. You have the chance of them accidentally getting into your facility, not so much getting into infest, because they like to burrow down into the ground. So if they get inside, they're not going to reproduce. But you certainly don't want even a single groundhog in your facility. Typically with groundhogs, I'm going to assume that you're in the United States, Bill. Typically trapping and baiting is the way to go, but it's kind of tricky. You really need to know the correct placement, the correct areas. So in that case, I would probably give a pest control company a call and have them evaluate it and help you out with that one.
Okay, great. And the next one, Olivia Bagstrom, question, my plant is starting construction for an expansion. Any advice on keeping pests out during construction?
During construction, oh, very, very forward thinking on that. That's awesome. One of the interesting methods I've seen in the past is they actually construct sort of a double door system with plastic and wood framing, so that the construction workers go in, drop their tools, do a self-inspection, open their bags. Usually there's a plant employee there too to open their bags, make sure there's no pests. And again, that gives you that kind of vestibule, that kind of safe area before they get into the plant. So try and minimize the areas that they're coming and going from. Just have one or maybe two areas that they're entering and leaving the facility from, so you minimize that impact.
Okay, rightio. Dessa, what should the procedure be to prepare a food manufacturing facility for fogging?
Great. So the first thing you want to look at is sanitation, because remember, with your fog, it's a contact. So if you have a lot of sanitation issues, your pests could be buried beneath that, and how is that going to contact them? So look at your sanitation first. Second, open up everything you can. All of your equipment, if there's an opening that you can open that up so that, again, the fog can kind of penetrate in a little bit better. And then sealing. Again, watch your doors, your windows, any type of opening, vents, your roof. Watch all of those. Try and seal those up so that you keep that fog inside where it belongs so it can contact the pests.
Is that just a question from me? You know, when you use a fogging, is that safe on food contact surfaces? You know, does it leave residue? What do you need to do afterwards?
Sure, it depends on which treatment you're using. Different pesticides are going to have different regulations on that. Some of them are safe for food contact surfaces. Others you may need to clean and sanitize afterwards. So it just depends on what you're using.
Okay. Kylie, how to handle protected bats?
Very, very carefully. In the United States, bats are very, very protected, both at a federal level and a state level. That is something you need to contact your wildlife control company to help you out with. There are just way too many regulations on that one.
Okay. Julianne, best control for birds and lizards in food facilities?
Oh, great. Lizards are awesome because they're kind of doing your pest control for you, eating some of those bugs. But of course, we don't want them inside the facility. So your best bet is really to look at those exclusion techniques and look at the outside of your facility. Lizards have to eat something, which is typically insects. So if you have a lot of habitat for insects on the outside, that's why your lizards are coming there. So if you can reduce some of that habitat, some of those insects, the lizards will go elsewhere. Same thing with your bird problems. If you don't have the habitat for them, those trees, those bushes that they are living in, if there's not the insects that they're feeding on, they're going to go elsewhere farther away from your facility, and it'll be easier to exclude your facility so they don't get in.
Yeah, let's get to the root cause. Yeah. Lexi, I think Lexi was mentioning she does her own in-house pest control, but she's asking about annual reviews. Western won't do annual reviews, but is Orkin willing to do that type of thing?
We can certainly ask your local branch. So if you let us know where you are, we can certainly contact them and see what you can do for them. And it's also, when you do your own annual assessment, sometimes it's just helpful to have somebody from another department. Say you're in QA and you handle the pest management, get somebody from maintenance to go with you and get that just different perspective too. So think about that for you folks who are doing it in-house. But Lexi will definitely check that out if you contact us.
Okay. And Dessa again, with storage of raw peanuts, would it help to store smaller quantities in separate rooms, or is one large warehouse fine?
Well, it depends on the separate rooms and depends on the warehouse. Obviously, the bigger amount you have, the more risk. But if you have a nice tight building, I know peanut storage sometimes is a little bit more open. And it depends on the pest as well. So that one can just go either way. I don't have a good answer for that.
Okay. Sean, are there any other methods of keeping birds out of outside tank and rail car areas that doesn't involve netting? My company is anti-nets.
Oh, anti-nets. Nets are a great way to prevent birds from getting into a structure. It depends on the structure and what tools we have available, but you can often use spikes, those bird spikes on ledges that will prevent birds from landing on them. We also have shock strip, which is a little strip that has a small electrical current so that when the bird lands on it, it gets a little bit of a shock and decides it would rather be elsewhere. And some other preventative measures, even one that's a fogging. So we would have to check out your particular facility, but there are other options.
Okay, this is a rather long question from Tina, so bear with me. We are an organic facility. What is the best way to eliminate confused beetle? They are in our dust collector pipe. The pipe is tightly sealed, but we inspect the area every day and yet we always find larvae. Why is this? We cleaned the pipe and sealed it very well and still finding larvae.
Okay, so kind of two parts to this question, organic and the larvae. So with the organic, just remember, if you're in the United States, I'm going to assume that you're in the US, Tina, that you can use a lot of conventional methods. You just have to go through the right steps and clear it with your organic certifier. Confused flower beetles are a tough one. They get into all those little cracks and crevices. So even though you're cleaning that area very well, could be something outside that area, could be farther down the line, and as your product travels, that's where they're kind of building up. So I would suggest looking at the entire flow of your product, and especially using monitors. Find out where they might be coming from that you're just not thinking of looking at quite yet.
Okay, thank you. And Vreems, please share with us how to do trend analysis.
Okay, trend analysis is essentially taking the data from your devices, whether that's an insect light trap or a pheromone trap or whatever devices you're using, and just tracking those numbers. I like to use graphs because I'm very visual. I like to see the pretty colors and the little lines. Some people just see the numbers, but that trend analysis is just looking at how those trends are going. Are they increasing? Are they decreasing? I would always look at about a year's worth of data, and then you can always get more specific, look at 6 months, 3 months. But I would also plot on that, especially if you're going to do a graph, little arrows, little notes of when treatments happened or when something significant changed. Say you found that broken door seal and you replaced it. Put a little note right at that spot that said door seal fixed, because that again shows your verification of some of your corrective actions and verifies your trends.
Yeah. Good point. Otto, what is a normal fogging frequency and what treatments go along with it?
Okay, so we talked about the sanitation, obviously, and the exclusion. Frequency is tough because, again, I think you should be using your monitors and your numbers to tell you when you should fog. I don't like to do foggings on a regular schedule because that's not pest management. You're just putting a Band-Aid over it versus solving the problems. So look at what your numbers are, look at what your threshold might be. We were just talking about confused flower beetles. Maybe finding 10 confused flower beetles in one floor of your flour mill would be your threshold. So look at that. And what treatments go along with it. When you're doing a fogging, I always suggest using an insect growth regulator along with it. That gives you a real good residual. So anything coming in after that fogging has that little bit of a residual to knock down those populations a little. But you can always use baits, crack and crevice residual treatments, anything that you want to that would help your program with the verification and with the numbers that you're seeing.
Okay. Elisa, are black garden or carpenter ants an invasion threat similar to the small black ants that come into our house? There are some ant hills in the parking lot.
Yeah, ants are pretty tricky because even the ones that are living outside may still trail and forage inside your facility. So when you start seeing those on the outside, I would definitely look at treating some of that and looking at your exclusion along that side of the building so that you can treat it on the outside, keep it smaller on the outside, and prevent those trails from coming on the inside. Carpenter ants are typically after wood, but remember how I mentioned those pallets with the cockroaches? I've seen the same thing happen with carpenter ants. They've gotten into pallets, you bring the pallet inside, now you have ants on the inside.
Yeah. Nassim, any guidance on conducting an annual facility assessment with the pest control party?
Yeah, walk around with them. As they're doing their annual assessment, go with them, take notes, and then when you get to the end of it, combine those notes, do a combined facility assessment with what your third party has told you, what you've seen. And again, that partnership is going to be awesome because it's gonna let you work together and see different things and solve those problems.
And I guess as well, the technician and the biologist, they're the key frontline people, and in some situations, it keeps them on the toes, you know. Okay. Jose, what do you think about insecticide rotation for pest control?
Absolutely, yes. Anytime you're using pesticides, and again, for you folks who are doing it in-house, you do want to rotate, not just the pesticide, but look at the active ingredient on that. We don't want pests to become resistant to any of the pesticides that we're using. So on a regular basis, and it depends on what you're doing, what you're using, but on a regular basis, at least once a year, rotate your pesticides. Great question, Jose.
Okay, Donna, how to stop pests coming in through open doors? Many deliveries and moving raw materials from one storage area to another. What other measures can be taken?
Yeah, for your specific example, I would have to see your facility, but think about maybe some temporary construction. If doors have to stay open, can you put up air curtains, or can you put up plastic curtains? Those plastic strip curtains, so that it'll still prevent some of the pests. It won't be perfect, but it'll be better than a big, huge open door. So maybe that would help.
Okay. And do you recommend like auto closing doors as well, so that people don't leave them open?
I mean, your folks are busy. They want to move those forklifts. They want to move their product back and forth. They don't want to have to stop, open the door, stop, close the door. So yeah, if you have the ability to put in a rolling screen door or an automatic door, absolutely, yes.
Yeah. Mary Claire's asking about how to handle lizards, but I think I can say cut back on your vegetation, keep the lizard's food sources, the insects, away. So trim back everything.
Yeah,
I'm listening. Jorge, we have a real problem with geckos.
Yeah, and again, these are natural animals to have out in the environment. But if you make your direct environment right around your facility not so hospitable, they're going to go farther away instead of coming closer in. So look at that vegetation-free border, trimming back that vegetation, eliminating some of those insects on the outside so they go farther away.
Yep. Kathy, how can we inspect incoming shipments for weevils? The incoming shipment is usually a container shipment from abroad.
Yeah, so for most whole grains, which are what the weevils are going to be in, usually a probe sample, and what you're looking for is possibly the weevils. Hopefully you can see a couple of those, but also look for some of those damaged kernels with that tiny little hole in it that the weevils chewed out of the kernel. But take a probe sample, stick a probe in there, get a sample of that grain, and take a look at it. That's your best bet.
Okay, Rajnesh, advice for schedule about fumigation in beverage plants. Have you covered that one?
Yeah, same thing as those foggings. I don't like to have a regular schedule when it's needed, when your monitors tell you need it.
Okay, Ahmed, what factors controlling the need to make improvements to the IPM program?
Whenever something significant changes, when your process changes, when your raw ingredients change, when you bring in new equipment, whenever something significant changes, you should be looking at your IPM program. And then again, at least once a year.
Oh, these questions, they're never ending.
You guys are
fantastic.
Awesome.
Yeah. Stephanie, any tips about preventing raccoons and foxes from accessing pallets outside?
Store them a little differently, hopefully. Obviously, foxes and raccoons are out there. If you're storing those pallets on a concrete slab with nothing else around them, that's a tough area that raccoons and foxes are going to look at and go, that doesn't look as safe as I think it should be. So keep the area around those pallets clean and try and store them on either a concrete slab or asphalt or something hard.
Okay. And Claudia, how do you treat or eliminate ants that are many meters away from the process plant?
Yeah, so if they're on your property, there are certainly means to do that, whether that's a granular bait or maybe a liquid application. Again, your pest management professional should be able to direct you for that. If it's not on your property, look at what's in between that ant mound and your facility. Is there a food source? If they're being attracted in some way, try and put a stop to that. Eliminate that food source so they go the other direction. And again, watch your exclusion, watch your doorways, watch your ground entry around your facility.
Have you any idea what sort of distance ants will travel foraging around?
Depends on the species. Some of them will forage for 100 meters, 300 meters or more. It just depends on the ant species.
The hardy beast, those ants. Sean, just harking back to they won't pay for the netting. That's the reason why they don't like it.
Okay, it is expensive, but it's very effective. So it's the trade-off.
Okay, Matthew, best preventative measures for Indian meal moths in bulk grains, nuts, and other foods in the retail area.
Yeah, I'm assuming you're in the US. One of the great products that we have in the US is mating disruption. So what it does is it takes the Indian meal moth's own natural pheromone that the female puts off, the male follows it like a little trail of perfume. What mating disruption does is puts off this massive dose, so this male can't find the female anymore and just flies around in circles. So it doesn't actually kill them, but what it does is if they're prevented from mating, there's no eggs, there's no second generation. Very, very effective product for Indian meal moth.
Right. Mohammed, it's a sort of a two-part. He's put another comment further up. First part, how to keep birds away from a restaurant in an opened area, especially the kitchen itself that's accessible to birds.
Yeah. That's a tough one. Look at their resting habitat. Obviously, you have the food source, and that's going to be a little hard to control. But look at some of the areas where they may be resting or where they may be nesting, and see if you can't eliminate or make those areas less hospitable, with either the bird spikes or something on those ledges, so they won't sit there, they won't be as attracted.
Okay. And Melinda, how can you control weevils in sesame seed?
Not sure that you're actually talking about true weevils, because those are the ones that are going to get into the seeds, into the seed itself, into the kernel. But again, it's going to depend on which particular beetle that you have. And that's going to be a little bit of a tricky one. I'd have to see more of the situation to help out more on that one. Sorry, Melinda.
Okay, Funda, are there any validation for pest control? If there is, can you please give an example?
Absolutely. It goes back to your monitors. So if you have an insect light trap and you had 300 flies in it, but then you did a treatment, the next week that light trap should only have 50 flies, 20 flies. So use those devices, use your traps, use your monitors to validate what your corrective actions have been.
Okay, and Adam, what is the best method to determine if there are stored pests inside of product?
Look for them. It depends on the product. I would identify what stored product pests are going to be most common for your product. And then again, look for the adults, because the adults are the easiest to see, but look for some of the damage that they may cause. Look for holes in packaging. Any of those secondary things you can look for as well.
Great. Claudia, in the case of termites, if I already had an event, how can I prevent it?
Okay. Termites, we don't see termites too much in the food industry. This is a great one. Termites are of course after wood. They're going to be burrowing in wood and eating parts of the wood. So any spare wood that you have, including pallets, make sure that is not next to your facility. Keep that a distance from your facility. If you are storing pallets on the outside, again, look for that hard surface. Don't store them on grass. Don't store them on ground. And there are preventative termite treatments, kind of like a barrier treatment around your facility that can be done as well. Again, not sure if you're in the US, but you probably have that ability depending on where you are in the world.
Okay. Kathy, how do you inspect incoming pallet shipments for the tiny rice weevils?
Carefully. You do. You have to have a good set of eyes. But one of the other things you can think about doing is getting an air hose, one of those pressurized air hoses, and blowing it off. And then sometimes if you see something come off that, you can inspect it a little bit closer, inspect to see if it was just a piece of dirt or if it's a weevil. And that's a great way to do it as well.
Okay. Mina, I dry fruits with no preservatives. This year we had a problem with plodia inside the pet secure boxes. Why and how did this happen?
So plodia, Indian meal moth is what we're talking about again. Right. They tend to get into almost anything. They're so diverse in the foods that they will infest. I can't speak to all the conditions, but it sounds like this year was just one of those years. And all it takes is one or two getting in, laying some eggs, and you have a population within about 20 to 30 days. So it's hard to target that just off this question, but chances are one or two got in, and that's where your infestation came from.
Okay. Fantastic. Tina, confused beetle goes after cereals, right? And grain beetles goes for raw flour. Is this correct?
Really depends. Interestingly enough, your confused flower beetles will go after a number of products. It just has to be some type of broken grain or milled grain. They can't go after those intact kernels of wheat or corn. They need some type of breakage, some type of processing before they can get to it. Grain beetles, again, grain beetles is kind of a broad category, so I'm not quite sure which one. But when we're talking about the true weevils, those are the ones that actually get inside those kernels of grain. The egg gets laid, the larvae develops inside the kernel, and then it's the adult that comes out. So we have weevils, which are inside the kernel, and then the rest of our grain beetles that are typically outside with broken or milled material.
Right. Just in case you needed a bit of motivation there, Jelena, great webinar.
Thank you.
So we'll move on to the next question. Williams, how can we control the insects coming in from swamp cooler ventilation?
Check your filters. If you need to install screens, whether that's on the outside intake or on the inside, check your filters and check your screening. That's going to be your best bet on that one.
Okay, I think we're getting there. Janice, what do you do about seasonal infestations of Asian beetles?
So your Asian lady beetles, which is what I'm assuming you're going after here, are typically a fall pest. They'll be attracted to those buildings in the fall, just looking for a safe place. They're not going to eat the food. They're not going to reproduce, but we obviously don't want those inside the facility. So the best thing you can do is find out early where they may be congregating on the outside of your building, treat those areas, and really do a good job with that exclusion. Just don't let them in the first place.
And Jelena, if grain storage is contaminated, can raw material be saved?
That's a tricky one. Depends on the grain, depending on the storage, and depends on the pest. In some cases, when we have large grain storage, we know that most of the grain pests are only going to infest the first 5 or 6 feet, the first 2 meters of grain on the top and on the bottom. So the middle stuff is usually still okay. Really just depends on which pest it is and what kind of storage we're looking at there, Jelena.
Okay. I think we have exhausted the questions. So you can start typing in your positive feedback now for Chelle, because she's done absolutely fantastic. We are 6 minutes over the hour, but while we've got Chelle here, I'm sure you'll agree, it's been a fantastic educational presentation, and the questions, the knowledge of you, Chelle, is fantastic. And we've not covered this subject before, so they're all chomping at the bit. Just to say, are dragonflies pests?
As pests, what? Dragonflies are mosquito eaters. They are some of the best beneficial insects out there. But dragonflies are aquatic, so look at whatever your water sources are. And again, if those water sources can be moved a little bit farther away potentially, or maybe screened off a little bit better, that'll keep the dragonflies towards that water source away from your facility. But they eat tons of mosquitoes. Dragonflies are amazing.
You know why I said that, don't you, Chelle?
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Okay. Well, you can see in the sidebar, just from the audience there, you can see it was fantastic.
Feel free to contact us. Again, my email is mhartzer@rollins.com. Would love to answer more questions as you folks think of it and help you out with any of your issues.
Yeah, and we'll follow up, like I said, with the recording slides, links, and in the slide deck is your contact details. So, right, I think we'll wrap it up. Thanks for your time, Chelle. It's been absolutely fantastic. I've enjoyed it. Have you enjoyed it?
Oh, absolutely. It's so great to see so many folks from all over the world. You folks have been great. Thank you so much.
Great. All right. Thanks very much, Chelle.
Bye, folks.
Right, ladies and gents, that's it. We'll see you on the next webinar. Thanks for your attendance today and your time and your input for making it such an engaging webinar. See you soon. Bye.